2024 and my summer vacation to visit Irene at her volunteer post, which this year is the Cradle of Forestry in America, located in the Pisgah National Forest of southwestern North Carolina, which for most of America actually is towards the east. My being a forestry major, it might be assumed I've been to the Cradle of Forestry before, but nope, somehow the birthplace of scientific forestry in America has spent 45 years on my bucket list, so I look forward to this trip. There's more to see in southwestern North Carolina than just forestry, and my trip evolved into a tour across the spectrum of house sizes. Starting at the big end, the Biltmore Mansion is nearby, accessible from the fabled Blue Ridge Parkway, itself an essential thing to experience in America. 470 miles long, it extends from the Great Smoky Mountains in the south up to Shenandoah in the north. No billboards, no commercial traffic, a speed limit of 35 miles an hour, and immaculate road surface, and a vista point to stop at every couple of miles. For travelers not in a hurry, the Blue Ridge is America's finest driving experience. Back in the 1980s, I drove the entire thing, taking 10 days, still an all-time great travel experience of mine. The Biltmore Mansion is in Asheville, so just an hour up the Parkway from the Cradle. Turning the final corner, the first thing seen is the front yard and the entire mansion. At 179,000 square feet, this house was, and still is, the biggest house in America. About 90 times bigger than average houses today. The next biggest house is 2/3 the size of Biltmore, and Hearst Castle, a well-known abode in California, is 1/3 the size of Biltmore. Still, Biltmore is a mere shed globally, 1/5 the size of Buckingham Palace, which is only 18th on the list of big houses of the world. Biltmore was built by George Vanderbilt, third generation of the Vanderbilts of America. It was completed in 1895 during the Gilded Age of the late 1800s. Open for tours today, the walkthrough of the house is expensive, but well worth it. The entry foyer is amazing, and it only gets richer from there with the dining room and its organ, a stairwell with a 3-story chandelier, and recreational amenities like bowling and an indoor pool. Don't miss the backyard and the greenhouse and garden. Many books have been written on the Vanderbilt dynasty, and the one we read, The Last Castle, is highly recommendable. Also recommendable, go see the Biltmore Mansion for yourself if you haven't yet. At the other end of the housing spectrum, small cabins in the woods are on display back at the Cradle of Forestry, where scientific forestry was first practiced in America. The forests of southwestern North Carolina had been cut over in the 1800s, and George Vanderbilt wanted forestry practiced there to restore the landscape around his house. The director of that effort was a forester from Germany, Karl Schenk, who came to southwestern North Carolina in 1895 to implement forestry on the Biltmore estate. Schenk was academically minded, possessing a PhD in forestry, which was rare at that time, so in 1898 he started the Biltmore Forest School, occupying these small cabins for classrooms, dormitories, offices, and food services. The curriculum lasted a year and included lectures in the mornings and field trips in the afternoons, by horse, to see and practice forestry in the woods. This school predates the forestry programs of Cornell and Yale, so this is considered the birthplace of scientific forestry in America, as affirmed by one of North Carolina's vanity license plates. The school closed in 1913 after teaching forestry to some 350 students total. A video about Schenk and his forestry school is recommendable generally, not just for forestry majors, and a short trailer is linked below. The Cradle of Forestry interprets this story in a fun, family-friendly way, and a visit to the Cradle is highly recommendable. But there's more. Another notable house of southwestern North Carolina, falling in the middle of the spectrum of size and affluence, was purchased in 1945 by Carl Sandberg, one of the all-time elite authors of America. In his elder years, Sandberg and his family were living in Michigan, with its cold winters, so they sought an easier climate to retire to, which would be southwestern North Carolina for sure. The house they moved into is 9,000 square feet, bigger than today's average, but nowhere near the size of the Biltmore Mansion. The Sandberg house is now a unit of the National Park System, and from any vantage point, near or far, it is mesmerizing. It also came with 250 acres of farm and forest land, allowing his wife, Lillian Streichen, accomplished in her own right, to continue tending her herd of champion goats, which the Park Service still maintains even today, to the delight of visitors. An easy trail ascends to the highest point of the property, Glassy Mountain, affording a grand vista of the forest lands of southwestern North Carolina. Carl continued riding here up until his death in 1967, often in this chair placed outside the back of the house, where he could retreat and, in his words, dirty up some paper. Of his vast bibliography of dirtied paper, his multi-volume masterpiece on Abraham Lincoln is highly extolled, and Carl himself liked his book entitled The People, Yes. Both are longish, but still recommendable because it is Carl Sandburg. It wasn't for nothing that Sandberg received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I didn't happen to even go inside the house on my visit, but the grounds outside were thoroughly captivating and kid and dog friendly. Add this house of southwestern North Carolina to your list of essential destinations in America. Yet another housing option visited on this trip was a fire lookout tower known as Frying Pan. It's so close to the cradle that it's visible from the cradle, and a 20-minute drive to the trailhead includes more time on the Blue Ridge Parkway, always a good thing. The trail up and back is super lovely and short, less than a mile each way. Reaching the top, first glance of the tower is breathtaking, either in fog or on a clear day. At 70 feet tall, this is the tallest fire tower of southwestern North Carolina, and it truly does tower over the trees. The staircase is open, and although it's totally safe to go up, it's also a bit daunting for anyone not used to such heights. I got as high as halfway up before feeling queasy, especially given the high winds of that day. But even from halfway up, the view is fantastic. Not what Shank saw when he first arrived here, but rather restored forests in all directions. This tower, built in 1941, is no longer staffed, but the cabin on top is 12 feet by 12 feet, so the smallest habitation seen on this trip so far. Big enough for one person and perhaps a close companion. There would have been a small kitchen and a cot inside for living. There also would have been this, the Osborne Fire Finder, which isn't small and would have taken up maybe 10% of the floor plan. You gotta hand it to fire tower staffers who lived in such cramped conditions and in such isolation, serving the country by spotting fires right when they got started, providing at least a chance at fire control while the fires were still small. One more iteration of housing in southwestern North Carolina was that of the indigenous people of the region, among them Cherokee. Artistic depictions show their dwellings to be quite modest in size and grouped together in communities. Easy to construct and totally utilitarian, this housing served well its purpose for generations. I didn't happen to visit any particular site of the Cherokee on this trip, but the Arboretum in Asheville has a sculpture on display, as well as an acknowledgement that southwestern North Carolina was the home of indigenous people since time immemorial. The Cherokee and other indigenous people were forcibly displaced from this region in the late 1830s, a dark event in U.S. history now referred to as the Trail of Tears. The Park Service has a unit that interprets the Trail of Tears, not a single site, but rather an auto route that has many stops across several states. Hundreds of books cover the Trail of Tears, any one of which would be recommendable to foster awareness of this event for anyone unfamiliar with it. Thanks to Irene and the new pup, Tennessee Tuxedo, for choosing the Cradle of Forestry for the volunteer gig this summer. I've always enjoyed my summer trips to wherever Irene volunteers, but southwestern North Carolina was especially fun and interesting. Can't wait to see where to in 2025, and I'm already looking forward to next year's trip. If the place next year happened to be in a state with Waffle House, that'd be a bonus for me, but I'm happy eating and capturing a selfie asset anywhere.